Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Representatives Baum, Campbell, Camper, Cochran, Faison, Garrett, Hawk, Hazelwood, Love, Moon, Shaw, Whitson, Williams, Chairman Hicks.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to call the Finance, Ways and Means Subcommittee to order for April the 18th, 2023. Are there any announcements or personal orders from the committee? Hearing none and seeing none. Just a couple announcements to make before we do get started. Just to give you a little bit of the schedule for this particular committee meeting, we will be taking up the 4 budget bills. And then once we get that completed, we will go into full finance where we will take up the 4 budget bills. Then we will go into calendar and rules. At that point, we will see where we're at in the day. We'll either take a break for lunch or we'll go back into budget sub and run a couple bills off until we get to lunch. And then we'll fall suit. We'll go budget sub. We'll do all the bills that are behind the budget. And then after we finish that, we'll go into full. And then after that, we will go into calendar and rules. So I just want to make sure that is clear. Any questions from the committee? All right, at this time, we do, again, our calendar this morning is going to be for the appropriations calendar, and we do have a budget schedule. Now, the way we're going to do this, members that are in the audience, Dakota is going to make his way down at the podium. If you all will please get your copy from Dakota, and the general public, if you would like one, the intern is going to make her way down to the right. Catherine is going to make her way down to the right, and you can get yours from her. So at this time, if you want to go ahead and start handing those out. Also, let me make this announcement before you get too busy. Also, it's on dashboard. You're going to see it's going to be sub calendar 3. So it's going to be on the dashboard as well. It is going to be on the dashboard as well. So sub calendar 3 will be on the dashboard. It's being posted right now. All right, and I'm going to ask you to please take your schedule, and I'm going to ask everyone if we could kind of get to order pretty quick. We've got a long day and a long calendar, so if you could go ahead and find a seat after you get your schedule, please. And I'm going to ask you to please, any side conversation, we're going to have to take that outside because we're ready to get started here. So if you could be finding your seat, your calendar, we're getting ready to get started. All right. Subcalendar 3 has been posted on dashboard at this time, so you can jump online and you can see the calendar we're going to be working off of. With that, we're going to begin with item number 1 on our calendar. It's going to be House Bill 1545 by Chair Lady Hazelwood. We have a motion to second. We've got a motion to second. We do have 3 amendments that we need to file on this bill. The first amendment, Chair Lady, that I have is 007768. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Do we have a motion and a second? We have a motion and a second. All right, we do have a motion to second. Chair Lady, you are recognized on amendment 007768, amendment number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a procedural amendment that just allows us to make sure that we have the budget whole.
All right, thank you very much, members. You've heard the description of drafting code 007768. Any discussion? Question's been called. Any objection? Call on the question. Hearing none and seeing none, we're now voting on drafting code 007768 onto House Bill 1545. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Back on the bill as amended. We are at amendment number 2, drafting code 006000. Is that correct, Chair Lady?
That is correct.
All right, we do have a motion and a second. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the administration amendment to the appropriation bill.
All right, thank you very much, members. You've heard the description of Amendment 7768. Any discussion? Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering if the chairman was going to go over these amendments before we adopt them, or she's going to do them all in one fell swoop when she get ready to talk about the budget bill. I don't see it on the dashboard.
Yeah, we will do it all together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right, any further discussion on Amendment 6000? Seeing none, we're now voting on Amendment 6000 onto House Bill 1545. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. We're back on the bill as amended. That brings us to Amendment number 3, Drafting Code 7000. Is that correct, Chair Lady?
That is the number that I have,
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman.
We have a motion. We have a motion to second. You are recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the legislative amendment to the appropriations bill.
All right. Thank you very much. Members, you've heard that description. Any discussion? Hearing none and seeing none, we're now voting on Amendment 7000 onto House Bill 1545. All those in favor say, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. We're back on the bill as amended, and you are recognized on the bill, Chair Lady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This year's bill has a total budget of $56.2 billion. This is the same as last year's budget, but the budget is different, and then it includes $4 billion more state dollars, state tax earnings, and $4 billion fewer federal and other dollars. So our budget, while remaining the same from the past fiscal year, does have more state funds in this year's budget. There are a number of major initiatives in the budget, and I'll just kind of walk through those. And we can do this as, if there are questions, I'll do this, an initiative, ask for questions, and then move forward in that way if that works for everybody. The school safety is a huge part of what we're doing in this budget. There's $140 million in recurring funds to make sure that there is at least one SRO per public school at $75,000 per year. These SRO grants will be administered through the Department of Safety. They will flow through the Department of Safety to local law enforcement, who will then have an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with their local LEA or LEAs. The grant will fund that SRO again so that every public school in Tennessee will have the capability of having an SRO at that facility. There's $40 million in non-recurring funding for school safety grants for public schools. The governor had proposed in his budget $20 million. The legislature has doubled that amount. Again, this will be a pool that our public schools can apply to for funds for technology, for other hardening of their security, in whatever ways fits their particular situation. There's $14 million in non-recurring funding for school safety grants for non-public schools. As we know, those schools are also can be a target that has been proven with this horrible tragedy. So the governor's amendment had included $7 million for that. The legislature felt that with the number of non-public schools in Tennessee, that number needed to be larger, and we have changed that to $14 million. There's $29 million in the budget to fund 122 positions within the Department of Homeland Security that will be a part of the school safety initiative. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if there are questions in that particular area, we can stop and address those.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair Lady. Members, any questions up into this point? All right, Chair Lady, you can continue.
Thank you. The budget includes over $113 million in recurring funding for a 5% across the board raise for state employees. Our state employees not only work hard, but as with every other employer out there, it's a tight market for employment. So we need to make sure that we pay our employees so that we can keep our trained folks here doing the work that we need them to do for the citizens of Tennessee. We have $125 million earmarked in the budget within the Artissa funding for teacher raises. So there's 125 million new dollars for teacher raises for our public school teachers. Last year, the administration had over $100 million for TEAM Act for market rate adjustments for employees within state government. This year, there was an additional 65 million included for further adjustments. But in order to provide for needed adjustments to legislative salaries, we've earmarked 12 million of that from the 65 specifically for our legislative employees who have frankly been a bit left behind in some of these market rate studies and raises that have been doled out to other departments. The constitutional officers have also provided over 15 million in general fund dollars for market rate adjustments. We have provided another 1.8 into a pool for judicial assistance within the AOC. And something that I am really proud of, something that a number of us on this committee have worked on for a long time, continuing to attempt to bring the folks that provide services to our most vulnerable Tennessee citizens, the developmentally and physically disabled. We are funding at a total of 52.4 million to raise DSPs to $15 per hour. The governor's budget had some of those dollars in it. We added 16 million here in the legislature to bring them up to $15 an hour, which is still, it's not a super competitive wage, but it is recognizing the work that these folks do, which, as I've said many times, it's not a job, it is a calling. If you're caring for these folks, if any of you would go out and visit any of these just walk with the folks in the job that they do, then I think we all would be appreciative and recognize the value that they have, again, in caring for Tennessee's most vulnerable citizens. We have also put $18 million in the budget for raises for those who are providing mental health services across the state of Tennessee. Mental health is a crisis situation. We need to make sure that those people who are providing that assistance are being paid in a way that is at least somewhat compensatory with the other sectors. And we have additional monies for DAs and our public defenders and judicial assistants. So those are the salary amounts that are in this budget, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Any questions on this section? Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, for the conversation and the money we've put for salaries and raising the salaries and all the things we're doing around salaries. But I'm also hearing from people that some of the salaries, particularly in the mental health world, is creating a challenge for nonprofits that's doing some of this work too, that they're not going to be able to keep up or keep the people that they have because people will start leaving to try to take these larger salaries. Have we looked at anything from that perspective in terms of some of the grant funding that we're given? Is any of that thought about or within this budget try to help so that our nonprofits can keep doing some of the work that they're doing, particularly in the mental health arena?
Chair Lady.
We have put additional funding into behavioral and mental health. The process for getting that out, frankly, I'm not, if you'll hold on just one second. I'm not sure we have put money in the bucket for mental health. The dispersion of that, of those dollars has not been defined in the budget. So there will be an opportunity for us to have discussion about that.
Leader Camper.
Thank you. I appreciate that because it's a kind of a real concern. And you know this with mental health and what we're dealing with right now. So we want to make sure that, when we come up with the formula or the concepts or the ideas, that we are all talking about how to best do that. So I really appreciate that. Also,
Leader Camper, I'm sorry, but I might say also there are a number of appropriations that deal with mental health, and some of those are some not-for-profit organizations, I believe.
Leader Camper.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm only asking because I can't find the language yet, and I know we're trying to figure it out. So I just wanted to get that on the record. We also, at this point, Madam Chair, are you also talking about some of the raises that we did for DCS and some of the caseworkers? Is some of this in the area that you're talking about right now?
Chair Lady.
Yes, those raises are included in the administration budget.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that was another one. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, you're
Yeah,
recognized,
thank you,
Leader.
sir. That was another one where I was hearing from some of the local organizations and agencies that's feeling like some of their and DCS definitely need to raise um, are dealing with trying to keep experienced people because they're leaving to go. And I know we have the same thing within the other agencies where other agencies are getting these increase in pay and people are losing. So I'm just saying we need to have a balance. And I know you're concerned, just as concerned about that as I am, Madam Chair.
I think we all are, and as I mentioned in comments earlier, it's a tight labor market. And so it is difficult for not-for-profits, government employees, or government, it's difficult sometimes to keep up with private sector raises because there's a great need across the board for a lot of the same sorts of skills.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, Madam Chair. And you're right, our people do deserve these raises, so I'm glad it's included in this budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Further discussion on where we are at this particular time explaining the bill. Seeing none, Chair Lady, you can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In K through 12 education, there is $350 million recurring in new funding. Let me say that again, $350 million recurring in new funding for the TISA formula. That includes salary increases, health insurance, retirement, direct funding, outcomes, and this brings the total TISA funding with funding from last year to more than $1 billion. So Tennessee, again, if you want to know, I've heard this said many times, if you want to know what people value, look at their checkbook. When you look at the state of Tennessee's checkbook, there's a big hunk of it going to education. TennCare and education are the two things that are primary funding revenue. They're primary recipients of the revenue in Tennessee. The budget includes $21.5 million in recurring funding for expansion of the summer learning camps. Those camps have proven to be very effective in overcoming COVID loss, bringing kids up to where they need to be at grade level. And this year, those learning camps are going to be expanded for K through 3. It also will allow 9th grade students to participate in those camps as well. So again, there's $21.5 million in recurring funding for the expansion of the summer learning camps. $10 million recurring for summer transportation grants so that these kids can have a way to get to school. $7.6 million recurring funding for tutoring services for the K through 3 students who are retained under the new TISA rules. And there is a $1.3 million market rate adjustment for teachers at our special schools. Those folks have been left behind in some of the other raises that have happened previously. So we're making sure that this is like the Tennessee School for the Blind, those sorts of schools, those teachers will be getting appropriate raises as well. And then there's $15.5 million recurring that will hold the locals harmless so that they can fund 6 weeks of paid family leave for teachers. I think this is critically important, and I hope everybody that's watching out there and everybody that's listening to me hears that today. We are going to provide 6 weeks of paid family leave for teachers. This is something that they have never had. The state is going to fund that. There will not be any cost to the local government to do that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we can stop for questions in that area if you'd like.
Okay, thank you, Chair Lady. Members, any questions here? Representative Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chair Lady. I believe that the summer camps and the after-school tutorial that's being funded along with transportation, this is all designed to help with our third grade retention concerns we had this session. Is that correct?
Chair Lady.
That's a primary driver for it, but it's also just to provide kids who may not have been a bit behind, not only K through 3, but going forward. Again, this is K through 8, and we're going to allow ninth graders to participate this year. So it's just making sure that we are not leaving our children behind, that they have at the appropriate place that they need to be able to continue to learn.
Representative Love.
Yes, and more of a comment than a question. Thank you for that, because I do think, as all of us realize, that a lot of these students are coming out of those COVID restrictions and may not have had the interaction with classmates. And so I really support this and appreciate the effort to put this money into after-school tutorials and summer camps to get our kids back on grade level. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair, you talked about the paid family leave for teachers. Now, that also include, though, I guess, all state employees, does it?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
We did do that, and that is part of the budget. You're right. We were just speaking of the education piece here. But yes, state employees also will be getting 6 weeks paid leave for family leave.
Thank you, ma'am. I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Seeing none, Chair Lady Hazelwood, please continue.
Thank you. The next segment on mental health, as I mentioned to Leader Camper earlier with her questions, there's $8 million recurring to expand K through 12 behavioral health liaisons in the schools. Again, we recognize that there's students with challenges, with issues, and we're putting these behavioral health liaisons into the schools to be able to help identify and work with those children early to as a preventative measure, and make sure that they get directed to appropriate services to meet their needs. And then we have $13 million for residential reentry housing programs.
Okay, any questions for the Chair Lady? Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you repeat how much you said? I heard the 13 million. What was the first number you gave?
8 million.
8. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, any other questions for the sponsor? Leader Camper.
On a recurring basis.
Yes.
Okay, Chair Lady Hazelwood, please continue.
Thank you. On the next section is something we all like to talk about. It's nice to go back home and tell people that you gave them a tax cut, and we're going to be able to do that this year in spades. The budget recognizes $272 million in tax cut to provide a 3-month sales tax holiday that will run from August the 1st to October 31st, and includes that $272 million, includes $111 million to hold locals harmless. So there'll be no sales tax on food, and your local government will not suffer as a result of not collecting that tax. Again, I think that's a big boom for Tennessee families. In Tennessee, we don't have income tax. We don't have a real way to give money back to the everyday taxpayer. This is one way to do that. Every Tennessean buys food. This will allow families to just take advantage of a little bit more money in their pocket for 3 months this year. Last year, you might recall, we had done it for 2. We also increased the threshold for business taxes, and that will reduce the number of small businesses who even have to file business taxes. That's a reduction of $9.8 million in recurring money. And there's a number of changes to franchise and excise taxes. A lot of things, I will mention just a few. We are conforming to federal depreciation standards. We're giving franchise and excise tax, and you'll hear a theme here for companies that provide family and medical leave, the FMLA leave that we're providing for teachers and for state employees. If a company provides that, then we're providing an excise tax credit for that to them. And also there's a $50,000 standard tax deduction. This will make small businesses in particular in Tennessee. It's going to help their bottom line, and it's going to just help them with there will be less taxes to file, and will just, I hope, allow them to reinvest and grow their business in Tennessee. So again, that total of all of those tax cuts is $404 million. That's $404 million that will be going back into Tennesseans' pockets this year.
All right. Any questions on this section? Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chair Lady. On the small business tax relief you talked about, is this the traditional definition of small business where it's businesses that are like grossing maybe like $4 million, or is it like this smaller businesses? Which group of small businesses
Chair Lady
does this
Hazelwood.
affect?
Actually, it would be both. It increases the threshold for business taxes. So it makes the threshold higher. You have to have more earnings before you're even required to file business taxes.
Leader Camper.
Okay, so you said it's both, just all small business regardless of
Yes,
their
because
gross
it's-
receipts.
I'm sorry.
That's all right, yeah,
Leader Camper, you finished with your question?
I did.
Okay. Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Yes, it raises the threshold, so anybody below that threshold won't even have to pay a tax. So that will impact your smaller businesses, from micro up to the threshold level.
Leader Camper.
Thank you.
All right. Any more questions? All right. Chair Lady Hazelwood.
The next part of the budget that I'm going to talk about is a legislative initiative, and I think it's important for a lot of our members and a lot of citizens in Tennessee. Our hospitals, a number of our hospitals, particularly in rural areas, are really suffering. It's been a difficult time for them. There's been some monies that have been available through the federal government, through the COVID relief plans. Those monies have been expended now. And without some additional assistance, rural hospitals and our safety net hospitals, particularly our rural hospitals, really, there are a number of them on the brink of closure. So we, as a legislative body, are allocating $110 million in non-recurring funding. We're earmarking that from the 10 care reserves to provide that kind of relief for funding for hospitals. The 10 care reserves will still be more than $1 billion. So we're being fiscally conservative there as well, but we're using $110 million from those reserves to make sure that our rural hospitals and our safety net hospitals can continue to care for Tennesseans.
All right. Any questions on this section? Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair, just for my information, kind of explain how that will be dispersed, because that's not something that I quite understand. So just help me understand how that money will go to the hospitals. Is it based upon the size, patient care, so forth? Can you, if that makes any sense?
Chair
There-
Lady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There will be a formulary developed, and that formulary will give weight to the rural hospitals and to uncompensated care, and Medicare and Medicaid care, and also just the care that our hospitals are required to care for anybody who walks through the door. You cannot turn someone away. So these dollars will be dedicated to compensating for that care, which in many cases, the hospitals have just had to, take care of or provide those services without adequate compensation. So that's what we're addressing with this $110 million. And the $110 million will allow these hospitals to draw down some additional federal funding as well. So it will be multiplied.
Okay. Further questions on this section? Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Just as a follow-up, I just think want to thank the chair lady and the chairman and the team for working very diligently on these revenues. I know The speaker also had a lot of input as it relates to this additional revenues, because in communities like mine where hospitals are really struggling after COVID, this is going to give them an opportunity to recover a lot of those lost revenues that they had there, with the idea that hopefully in the future we can find a better funding solution for our hospitals altogether. But just want to thank the committee for their focus on this particular part.
Thank you, Chairman. Anyone else? Chair Lady?
And I'd just like to amen that the speaker was very adamant from the beginning of our budget talks that we needed to make sure that we address this issue. And we've had a lot of conversations throughout the session with the administration, with the hospital association, with a lot of the participants in this field. And again, this is not going to solve every hospital's problem. And what we intend to do, this is a gap. This is a bridging a gap for this year. But our goal and our intent is to sit down during this coming year and work on a formulary going forward that is going to make sure that our hospitals are adequately compensated and that they can remain operational. So there's going to be a lot of conversations with the hospital association, with the administration, with our folks in the legislature as we look into that more fully. Again, this is not a fix. It's a Band-Aid till we get to a fix.
Oh, Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair Lady, for that. So in this conversation that's going to go on over the next year, I think it's important also for us to be looking at like where the growth is going to be. I'm thinking about out in West Tennessee, where I think Blue Oval City is going to kind of transform what's happening in West Tennessee, which is going to put pressure on a lot of our entire healthcare system, I believe, and just the entire area out there. So I would hope that we're looking at it from, this holistic perspective, and knowing you, Chair Lady, I got a feeling that's where you're going with this. So I really appreciate that. And it sounds as if you want to make sure everybody's at the table. So I'm appreciative of that too. Is that kind of your intent for us to kind of look at this holistically, where the pressure points are, where we expect growth? What could we be doing as a state to make sure that we are providing, helping with the providing of health care across the state?
Leader Camper, I think what we want to do is make sure that our existing hospitals remain solvent. And as you've said, these hospitals, there are high growth areas, and those issues are going to have to be dealt with. We're going to be relying, I think, a lot on the hospital association, their membership, to provide us that kind of information to help us determine, how these formularies should be developed.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, any other questions? Representative Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chair Lady Hazelwood, thank you so much for the presentation. As always, you've done an amazing job. I do want to point out as we go forward into the 25 and 26 and 27 year, and I don't expect this at the moment to have an answer, but I would like to get from staff some way that we can identify the recurring dollars in this particular budget and non-recurring dollars as well. Just as we're looking toward future budget documents, what can we expect to be recurring in terms of revenues coming in, especially not necessarily the spending, but revenues coming in. I think that's something important that I'd like to see as we go forward to the next 3-4 years. Madam Chair, members, thank you.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you. We'll take that under advisement.
Anyone else like to be recognized? Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you. The next section that I'm going to talk about is some non-recurring statewide grant pools that we have set up in this year's budget. We have a number of requests from members, from citizens across the state every year for volunteer fire departments, rescue squads, all sorts of organizations and entities that do work that is important to the state, that need additional help. They need some additional resources. about 3 years ago, we set up a fund for senior citizen centers. It's difficult for me to get all three of those words out together, senior citizen centers. And we developed a pool, we developed a grant process so that senior citizen centers across the state could apply and those grants could be distributed. That's worked very well in getting monies distributed on a more of a statewide basis. We have done the same thing last year for volunteer fire departments. So now we're going to set up recurring, non-recurring grant pools. This year, volunteer fire departments, we have set aside $5 million that volunteer fire departments across the state can apply to that pool for assistance for whatever equipment, supplies, whatever it is that they might need. We're setting $3 million into a rescue squad grant pool. EMS, a $2 million pool. Senior citizen centers, again, we're leaving $1 million there. And a new fund that we're setting up this year. We have a number of small museums across the state that are important to the communities. There's a lot of history that is being housed there, and we will get numerous requests from members for appropriations requests on an annual basis for a lot of these. We're going to put $5 million into a pool, and we're going to ask the Tennessee State Museum, who has a lot of expertise in this area, to manage that grant pool, to have these grant applications, evaluate them, and distribute those dollars throughout the state for our smaller museums. We also always have a number of requests for inclusion parks, things like Miracle Field, places where people of all sorts of abilities can come and enjoy the facilities. We're putting in $2.5 million into a grant pool that will allow for those kinds of applications to be submitted and those dollars to be distributed. We also included $1 million in the AA for TDEC so that they can have additional funding for adult changing tables in state parks. This is a program that we started last year that doesn't impact a huge number of people, but those people that it impacts in a tremendous way. So again, we're very proud to be able to do that in this year's budget. I'll move on unless there are questions about the grant pools. and
Any
talk-
questions? Okay, Chair Lady.
Right. Let's talk about what we're doing in Tennessee to promote strong families. We have a total of $85 million that will go to improve maternal, postpartum, and children's health outcomes. Those will be distributed through TennCare and by expanding the eligibility threshold. Postpartum coverage for a full year. Last year we did a trial program with that. We are making that a permanent expansion so that every new mother who's being served under TennCare will be eligible for postpartum coverage for a full year. We're going to also implement 12-month continuous TennCare eligibility for low-income children. We want to make sure that every child in Tennessee has access to adequate health care. There's $42 million through the developmentally and intellectually disabled Department for increased placement for stability for foster families who are willing and able to care for children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There are more resources required to do that. So this will allow us to expand the provider network for children with those kinds of behavioral and developmental needs. Also provide respite care for children that are in DCS custody. There's $10 million in TennCare shared savings that's being used to fund a pilot program for free diapers for children under the age of 2. And then there's $16 million for the second year in a dental services pilot program that is going to address unmet dental needs and services and to increase the number of dentists practicing in the state. We have a provider issue as well as an access issue, financial access issue. So this $16 million will be used to improve both the healthcare and the number of providers that are out there to do it.
Any questions on this section? Seeing none. Chair Lady Hazelwood.
All right, state parks, which are actually jewels in Tennessee's crown, and we have $329 million that is allocated for state parks, for natural areas, forest, and this includes funding to make sure that our parks are more accessible to all Tennesseans, the disabled as well as every other Tennessean. There's $41 million for trails and greenways, $82 million for environmental cleanup. While Tennessee is a beautiful state, we do have trash issues, and it continues to be an ongoing problem. So we have $82 million for all sorts of environmental cleanup, and $308 million in capital appropriations for state park improvements statewide. And with that,
Okay, any questions on the park section? Okay, Chair Lady Hazelwood.
the next big section, and I know there's been so much discussion about that. This is just a review for sure, but that we have $3 billion in the Transportation Modernization Fund, $300 million for the state aid programs. So these are dollars that will go back to your local counties for improvements in state aid roads. And we have $76.7 million in recurring funding for the Transportation Equity Fund for airports. This is something that we've been working towards for a long time. Our airports provide a huge economic impact, positive economic impact on our state. And this, by providing this buckets in recurring funding, is going to allow our airports to be able to plan better, to develop long-range plans, which is something that I've not been able to do in the past because the money has so often been on a non-recurring basis. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would take any questions about transportation.
Okay, any questions about transportation?
I should say transportation funding, not transportation.
All right, I don't see any hands. Representative Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume that soon as this budget is passed, that project will get started both locally and as well as the public-private partnerships.
Chair Lady?
Again, I wish Chairman Howell were present to probably better answer these questions, but on the state aid dollars will be, when this budget is passed, those dollars will be immediately allocated. On the public-private partnerships, there's a process to that, and the Department of Transportation will be working on developing guidelines and bringing those back. So we're not going to see those public-private partnerships. They're not going to happen when we pass this budget. We're not going to see one of those in July. Those will be a more longer term.
Okay, any other questions? Representative Shaw? Love. I looked at him and I meant you, Representative Love. I know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did have a question, transportation related. There is an allocation of $10 million for the Music City Executive Airport for facility and infrastructure improvements on page 3.
Chair Lady?
Yes, that is a commercial airport. So there is an allocation, you're correct, $10 million.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I noticed they have an airport authority board also. And they're about to get some state money. I'll raise that question later on with somebody else. Thank you, Chair Lady.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? All right, Chair Lady?
In our next category is safety. We have $357 million expanding the Tennessee Advanced Communications Network that will allow emergency radio coverage and purchase radios for local agencies so that all of our safety and law enforcement agencies will be able to talk to each other. We have $28.7 million that will fund 142 new state troopers across the state. And there's also funding to establish one new judge in the 13th, 19th, and 22nd judicial districts. We have several judicial districts with case overloads. This will allow us to at least start to address those particular districts. We have $75 million for a statewide e-filing court system that will make our courts operate more efficiently and again, help them to communicate.
Okay. Any questions for this section? Okay, Chair Lady.
Economic development, there's $45 million non-recurring for Rural Development Fund for grants and services that will enhance Tennessee's rural communities and distressed counties. That will help with site development in industrial parks in these counties. There's community asset improvements, will help them to be able to market and do strategic planning. Also, downtown revitalization is a key part of that $45 million. I think that those grants have made a huge difference as you travel across the state and you see our small towns. The court squares are bustling and there's lots more activity in a number of places because these small cities and counties have used these revitalization grants to help make that happen. We have $10 million in historic development grants and $103 million in the Fast Track Fund that helps with businesses who are expanding and relocating to Tennessee.
Okay, any questions on ECD? Okay, Chair Lady.
In higher ed, we have $1 billion. Let me repeat that, $1 billion for the Tennessee Board of Regents that will be used for our TCATs. There'll be $386 million for new buildings for TCAT facilities, $147 million for new campuses where we'll have new TCAT locations so that there'll be more opportunity for our Tennessee students to continue post-secondary education in a TCAT without having to travel long distances. There is $370 million for replacement campuses where we have campuses that need additional work and need other things to be done. And I want to mention that these dollars also include funding for the equipment within the TCATs, which is a critical part. We can build all the buildings that we want to, but if we don't have equipment in there that's appropriate to train students on, then we really haven't accomplished very much. So that is a part of that funding. We also, and I think this is really important to a lot of students in Tennessee, we have $5.3 million that is going to allow eligible Hope Scholarship students to continue to use their Hope Scholarship for up to 5 years from their initial enrollment. Sometimes things happen. You have to take some time out in your college career for whatever reason. This gives an additional year to be able to access those funds. It also allows students, we have a number of students in Tennessee who are taking advantage of our dual enrollment programs. This will allow those students who have completed a year or more sometimes of college by the time they finish high school, they will be able to continue to utilize the Hope for graduate school so that they can not only do post-secondary, but work on a master's degree and still receive the Hope Scholarship so they have the 5-year eligibility.
All right. I think you've heard the description of House Bill 1545 in its entirety. Are there any questions? Leader Camper.
Thank you, Madam. Oh, sorry. Mr. Chairman. Madam, he did not make me do it.
I'm going to blame that on Representative Love. down
Yes,
there.
sir. Madam Chair, you were talking about the TCATs, which I think is wonderful. It's great, and we really are going to be moving Tennessee forward with that. And I think it's good for our citizens, good for our future. I have a question, though. This is a one-time appropriation for the physical building of the TCATs, and you mentioned state-of-the-art equipment, which I think is important to have, because I think kind of before what we were running into is some of our stuff wasn't as competitive as some of the private institutions that was doing this work. So we weren't able to keep up with technology and things like that. So I'm glad to hear that there'll be investment in the equipment and stuff like that. My question is, on a recurring basis, though, we're gonna have to be able to keep up with technology and maintenance and things like that of that equipment. Stuff changed so fast, and technology trying to keep up with future jobs and workforce. Is there funding in this budget to deal with that, or is that something we're going to deal with later down the road, in your estimation?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
I believe that in this budget, the Tennessee Board of Regents, Chairman Tidings has made every effort to prepare for the future in terms of, as I said, providing for not only building the building, but providing whether it's technology, equipment to be trained on. And the TCATs and TBR, I think, has done just a remarkable job in partnering with industry. At the end of the day, what they're doing in each location, one of the really good things about TCATs is that they are working with the local businesses in their local area to determine, what are the jobs that are going to be available at Blue Oval City are going to be very different than the jobs that are going to be available at a location in Northeast Tennessee, for instance. So the TCATs in those two areas will be providing different curriculum, providing different kinds of training. They are working with businesses to, in partnership. If you need someone to be able to run a particular kind of machinery or whatever, then they're working with businesses. And oftentimes those businesses are providing equipment to TCATs to help train on, because it is, it's a win-win. The TCAT is getting the equipment, but the business is getting someone who is capable and ready to go to work once they walk out of the door of the TCAT. So I think that those kinds of partnerships will be a way that a lot of that will be addressed into the future.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't
Yes, ma'am.
mention our savings account, so I did neglect to go over that.
Yes, ma'am.
We are putting $250 million into the rainy day fund, and that brings our total now over $2 billion. We're also putting $250 million to fund our healthcare coverage for our retiree, that liability, and another $300 million to fund the liability for our pensions for our state employees. And I did mention that we're using the $110 million for the from the reserves for the hospital buybacks. So we're not only spending money, Mr. Chairman, we're also saving it and making sure that we are being fiscally responsible for future Tennesseans and future legislatures when they're looking to do their next budget.
All right. Thank you very much for this. All right. Would anyone like to be recognized? Any questions or comments? Chairman Williams.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to Chair Lady Hazelwood, when I came here, I won't say how long ago, the budget was $26.4 billion, and we had just over $500 million in savings in our rainy day fund. I think it's important that we continue to focus on, as we continue on focus on growth, that our savings account continues to grow at the same rate our budget does, which is why when drastic changes economically happen in our communities, we're one of the leading states in America as it relates to our recovery was so robust and good. So just want to thank the members of this committee and the people that came before us, and make sure that we did set aside quite a bit of money, because it's pretty amazing. In addition, I think it's important to note that by spending these additional monies in TCRS and OPEB funding, we're able to ensure to our state employees that their pensions or their retirement savings accounts will be there and fully funded when they expect to retire. And that too makes us a leader in that field across the nation. So thanks to the chair lady for her hard work.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. And as you think what questions you may have, I guess let me just say I'm one thing that I'm proud about as far as this budget is concerned is how much emphasis has been put on our health care, whether you look at what's being paid out for hospitals or whether you look at what we're going to be paying DSP providers or the mental health providers. Also, you look at the grants that we have out there for our firefighters, for our EMS, for our rescue squads. I think we are really moving the needle when it comes to mental health in this particular budget. And so not only that, but with emergency services all the way around, one thing that a bill that I had that got funded that's going to affect all of our folks back home is the $800 supplement for our EMS for training. I think that's huge. We've been doing it for troopers. We've been doing it for firefighters, and now being able to do that for EMS. So that's something that we've all struggled with, trying to find those folks, those good EMS folks, to be able to keep them, recruit and retain. And this is another tool in our toolbox to be able to do that as well. So very proud and very proud of the work that's been done, not only with the chair lady and Chairman Williams but the entire staff with the Finance Committee as well. Anyone else have any questions? Representative Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize. I was meant to ask this question when we're going over some of the higher ed thing. I did notice that we have a allocation in here for the comptroller of the Treasury for a forensic audit, Tennessee State University. I know, notwithstanding whatever issues have been going on at the university and what concerns we all have, I do have just a question about the amount. It's $2 million for a forensic audit. And I didn't know if at some point we get some clarity on, is that the industry standard? Is that how much forensic audits normally cost for universities? And even what time frame we're looking at? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 10 years? Again, this $2 million for a forensic audit for me is a bit of a concern. So at some point, if we can get some information about that, I'd really appreciate it.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe it is the industry standard. That's what I was told for that type of in-depth audit. In terms of the time frame, I'll just have to get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Leader Camper.
Thank you. Madam Chair, could we go back to on page 4 of the schedule? We have some additional funding for the school safety grants. Can you talk about what that is and like what is the total now with the additional funding added in?
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
It's on page 4, maybe midway.
Thank you, Leader Camper. I had to get reminded of what we're looking at here. The base budget had $7 million for non-public and $14 million for public schools for 20, I'm sorry, had $7 million for non-public schools and $20 million for public schools for school safety grants. We have added, with this appropriation amendment, we are adding another 7 and another 20 to make the total of the 14 and 40 that I mentioned when I covered the budget as amended.
Okay.
Leader Camper.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Leader Camper. I might also add the reason why the finance team wanted to add some additional revenues there is because if you divided the number of private schools by the original number that was proposed, the amount that somebody could submit for a grant for their facility really wouldn't do that much. And so the idea of the chairman and the chair lady was if we were to double those numbers, that it would make it more realistic as it relates to an actual improvement for every school if we did it. Obviously, not all schools are going to submit for a grant. Some feel like their individual schools are fortified well, but this gave them an opportunity to where it was worth their time and effort to submit grant paperwork to be able to do an improvement at their school.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, is there some, have the parameters been set for what types of improvements these funds could be used for? Or are we still developing it? We're just setting the money aside and then we'll have, I guess, the experts look at how to, what qualifies to draw down the grants?
Leader Camper, this fund this is not a new fund. This is a fund that has actually been there for a while, the 20 million and the 7 million. So this is just doubling it. The stipulations, yes, this would just be an add-on. The stipulations will be the same.
Okay, thank you.
And that grant pool was there last year as well. But to Chairman Williams' point, not all of the dollars were utilized. And I think part of the reason was that there just wasn't enough money for it to be, all that useful. This will enable them to actually have a meaningful amount that they can hopefully make a difference at their school location with.
Leader Camper.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? All right, are we ready to vote? All right. We are now voting on House Bill 1545, moving on to full finance. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1545 moves to full finance. All right, that brings us to item number 2 on our calendar. Item number 2 on our calendar is 1543, again by Chair Lady Hazelwood. Do we have a motion to second? We have a motion to second. And we have an amendment drafting code 005261. Is that correct, Chair Lady?
That's correct.
All right, we have a motion to second on the amendment. All right, we have a motion second. And at this time, do you want to describe the amendment, Chair Lady? You want to get that one on?
Let's just put it on and then I'll.
All right. Okay, any questions on the amendment? Hearing none, seeing none, we're now voting on Amendment 5261 on the House Bill 1543. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. We're back on the bill as amended. Chair Lady, you're recognized.
Thank you. Well, the bill itself just makes the statutory changes that are necessary to implement the budget. So this just enables us to implement the budget that we just passed. The amendment is a change, and this is actually Leader Lambert's idea, but it establishes that for fiscal year 23-24, the state employer 401k match equals 100% of the amount contributed by each state employee to the plan per month, up to a maximum of $100. So basically, if you're a state employee, if you're enrolled in the 401k plan, if you contribute $100 a month, the state will match $100 a month. Obviously, you can contribute more, but the state will match up to 100. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand ready for any questions.
All right, thank you, Chair Lady. Members, any discussion on House Bill 1543? Hearing none and seeing none, we're now voting on House Bill 1543, moving on to full finance. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1543 moves to full finance. All right, that brings us to item number 3 on our calendar is House Bill 1544 by Chair Lady Hazelwood. We have a motion and a second. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the Copeland cap, and it just simply increases the amount that the state appropriations, by which the state appropriations from state tax revenues for upcoming fiscal year can exceed the index of estimated growth in the state economy. So this is something, basically, it's required for us to pass an index bill whenever the growth in the appropriations from the state tax revenue exceeds the growth in personal income. And the growth rate is calculated year to year using the previous budget, and this year's budget recognizes an unusually high amount of growth of 11.45%.
All right, thank you very much for this description. Any discussion on House Bill 1544? Hearing none and seeing none, we're now voting on House Bill 1544, moving on to full finance. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1544 moves to full finance. That brings us to item number 4. Item number 4 on our calendars, House Bill 1542 by Chair Lady Hazelwood. You have a motion and a second. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just the bond bill. It just authorizes the state of Tennessee, if the funding board passes a resolution to do so, to issue and sell bonds not to exceed $83.8 million. We don't have any plans to issue bonds, but this simply allows us to, should the need arise during the upcoming budget year.
All right. Thank you, Chair Lady. Members, you've heard the description of House Bill 1542. Any discussion? Hearing none and seeing none, we're now voting on House Bill 1542, moving on to full finance. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1542 moves to full finance. All right, members, give us just a second here to make sure we have everything in order. And members, just a quick announcement, just when we come back to budget sub here in just a little while, the calendars are going to be taken up in this order. We'll have the sub regular plus the addendum calendars, the driver license calendar, and the behind the budget calendar, and then the special calendar. So that will be the order in which we take up our calendars when we come back to budget sub in a little bit. And with that, I think the Chair Lady has an announcement about Finance Full Committee. Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Finance Full will meet here in House Hearing Room 1 at 10:30.
All right. Any other announcements before we recess? Seeing none and hearing none, without objection, we stand in recess.